One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But what a lot of people don't know is that behind that triumphant moment was a mission absolutely riddled with near disasters, intense geopolitical pressure, and a wild mystery that literally left the lives of two men hanging by a thread. So let's jump straight into July 20th, 1969.
Imagine for a second being the very first humans to ever set foot on the moon. You've traveled 400,000 kilometers from home, you actually survived the landing against all odds, and you've stepped out onto the lunar surface. Incredible, right? But then, this terrifying realization hits you. You might be completely trapped. Like, what actually happens if the engine you need to blast back off the surface simply refuses to start?
Well, that wasn't just some hypothetical nightmare. Neil Armstrong actually accidentally broke off the absolutely vital ascent engine arming switch. Because of his incredibly bulky pressurized spacesuit and just how tiny the exit of the lunar module was, he bumped right into the panel while struggling to get out. And here's the craziest part of the whole shebang. In the airless vacuum of space, sound doesn't travel. Neither astronaut even heard the switch snap. They were totally unaware that the exact mechanism they needed to ignite their engine and get home was just sitting there, broken on the floor.
Section 1. The Space Race, a Cold War rivalry. So, how did they even get into this insanely dangerous situation? To truly understand why these guys were risking their lives in a tiny metal box hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, we have to rewind to the early space race. The US was severely losing. The Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in 1957. Then, in April 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person in space. The US government was completely shocked by this. And this rapid string of defeats is exactly what prompted President John F. Kennedy's super ambitious May 1961 mandate: land a man on the moon and return him safely before the decade was out. To actually meet that near impossible deadline, the pace of the Apollo program was absolutely staggering. Kennedy fueled it with $7 to $9 billion in extra funding, and the testing was just relentless. Tragically, in 1967, a devastating fire in the Apollo 1 cabin killed 3 astronauts during a ground test. But rather than quit, NASA pushed forward. They launched mission after mission, Apollo 4 through 10, testing rockets, heat shields, and lunar modules every few months to prepare for the main event. Section 2. A high-stakes journey, the launch of Apollo 11. Fast forward to July 16, 1969, when a massive Saturn V rocket, weighing a mind-boggling 3 million kilograms, blasted the Apollo 11 crew toward the moon. Once they reached lunar orbit, the crucial division of labor began. The spacecraft actually split in two. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took the lunar module, nicknamed the Eagle, down to the surface. Meanwhile, Michael Collins stayed up in orbit inside the command module, Columbia. Now, Armstrong and Aldrin obviously became household names, but Collins' unsung solo role up in orbit was absolutely essential. Without him successfully docking with the Eagle later on, his crewmates literally had no way to be rescued and returned to Earth. But getting down to the surface was a total nightmare. Right in the middle of their descent, terrifying alarms started blaring. The 1201 and 1202 alarms. Basically, the Eagle's guidance computer was overloading. The astronauts didn't even know what the alarms meant. Yet, in a display of incredible nerve, Mission Control analyzed the data on the fly and told them to press on. They were a go.
The danger wasn't over, though. At about 150 meters up, Armstrong realized the automatic landing program was steering them directly into a massive field of boulders. So he took manual control, desperately searching for a safe spot to land while Mission Control started a super tense countdown. Ultimately, he successfully landed the Eagle with a harrowing 30 seconds of fuel to spare. 30 seconds. Any longer, and they would have been forced to abort the mission entirely.
Which brings us right back to our broken switch crisis. After finishing their historic moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin realized that arming switch was snapped off. Now, a switch basically just completes an electrical circuit, so they just needed something to bridge that gap. and Buzz Aldrin brilliantly jammed a standard everyday ballpoint pen right into the mechanism to complete the electrical circuit. And no way, it actually worked. The engine reignited, and they launched back up to meet Michael Collins.
Section 3, debunking the hoax. Fact versus fiction. Because despite returning safely, and even the rival Soviet Union officially acknowledging the factual achievement, persistent conspiracy theories immediately popped up, claiming it was all a Hollywood hoax. Let's systematically debunk a few of these, starting with the famous flag. The myth says the flag is fluttering in a non-existent lunar breeze. But here are the facts. NASA knew a normal flag would just hang limply without air, so they specifically designed it with a horizontal rod running across the top. Because they actually had trouble extending that rod all the way, it created permanent ripples in the fabric. Plus, the aluminum rods acted kind of like springs, so the flag only moved when the astronauts were physically twisting it into the ground.
Then there's the whole missing stars argument. People point out that the sky is black, but there are no stars. Well, the landing took place during the bright lunar daytime. The sun was shining directly on the highly reflective lunar dust, not to mention the astronauts' bright white spacesuits. Cameras from that era simply didn't have the dynamic range to capture super faint starlight in the background while properly exposing for blindingly bright objects in the foreground. It's the exact same reason your smartphone can't capture stars if you snap a photo at night with the flash turned on.
Let's quickly knock out a few more. People claim the bizarre shadow angles prove there were studio lights. Actually, the super reflective moon dust acted as a massive secondary light source, scattering light everywhere. People ask how Neil Armstrong took photos without a camera in his hand. Simple. The camera was mounted directly to the chest of his spacesuit. And as for who filmed them stepping out of the ship, multiple cameras were pre-installed in the exterior of the lunar module specifically for that purpose. Section 4. Cost and criticism. The price of space. Moving past the conspiracy theories, it's really important to look at the entirely valid real-world criticisms here. While NASA was achieving the impossible, many American citizens were dealing with deep social unrest, the ongoing Vietnam War, and stark income inequality. The center of that debate was a truly staggering number, $24 billion. That was the total cost of the Apollo program back then. If we adjust that for today's money, we're talking well over $100 billion. That is an enormous amount of capital, and it understandably sparked a massive public debate. To put that into perspective, as early as 1962, the New York Times pointed out that the money being spent to go to the moon could have been used to build at least 120 Harvard-sized universities across the country. Critics made a very legitimate point, asking if this immense wealth wouldn't be better spent addressing domestic education and poverty. But here's the really wild part. There was a hidden technological benefit to all that spending that literally changed the world. In the early 1960s, early microchips, or integrated circuits, were brand new. Giant companies like IBM wouldn't even touch them yet. But NASA needed incredibly lightweight, powerful computers for Apollo. Because NASA placed massive orders for these early integrated circuits, it drove the manufacturing scale way up and pushed the price down by a whopping 90% in just 5 years. By trusting these brand new computer chips with the actual lives of astronauts navigating 400,000 kilometers through space, NASA proved their reliability and essentially paved the way for modern computing. The exponential technological boom that followed the moon landing is the direct reason you have a smartphone in your pocket or a computer on your desk today. The return on investment wasn't just lunar rocks, it was the entire digital age.
Section 5. The Artemis generation returned to the moon. Even with that massive leap in technology, public fascination faded surprisingly fast, and Apollo 17 ended up marking humanity's very last trip to the moon in December 1972.
For over 50 years, no human has been back, but this story is far from over. NASA is actively preparing to return through the new Artemis program, targeting to send humans back between 2025 and 2026. This time, the milestones include landing the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. It's an entirely new era of space exploration, focused not just on beating a rival, but on long-term lunar exploration and utilization.